Among Dragons coaches, players, and fans, it's generally perceived that the team changed the most between games 1 and 2 in 2017. Similarly, the 2018 rendition of the Dragons seems to have changed considerably between tryouts 1 and 2. In the last episode, I referenced that the Dragons were set to hold a second tryout in January, and that tryout went over without a hitch. Even so, though, there were a lot of things that the Dragons knew to be true in November that aren't true now. In November, the Dragons had no kicker. Now they do. In November, there was set to be an outright brawl to win spots on the offensive line. Now it looks pretty stable. And in November, offensive lineman Brandon Bingham was retired. Now, he isn't. At the time of this recording, it is in fact true. The most consistent player on the Dragons' offensive line, and arguably the whole team, will be back and ready for action in 2018. The 6'3", 305-pound tight end surprised everyone when he arrived at the Dragons' January 20th tryout with next to no warning, and after a quick meet and greet and catching up, Bingham got his cleats on and geared up to do what he does best: move people around. His return to the offensive line brings considerable stability to the blocking group, and grand leadership as well. Even at 35, he's still hanging with and consistently handling defensive ends nearly half his age, no thanks to 20-plus years of football experience and some feet that, at least for an offensive lineman, operate at warp speed. But of course, Bingham's return wasn't the only major development at tryouts. Not even close. This time around, we're going to do things a bit differently. Instead of working forward and covering events in chronological order, we'll be covering things by position, detailing the battles or lack thereof at each one. Some are almost completely locked up, like kicker and fullback, and others, such as quarterback, wide receiver, and linebacker, are as wide open as the game of arena football itself. We'll start things out with everyone's favorite position, the signal caller. In the last episode, we gave a pretty good dossier of the Dragons' quarterback situation over the past year or so and detailed the battle set to take place there during training camp. At the second tryout, not a lot changed, though Shane Martinez and Lorenz Steffen, who both had already been signed, weren't present due exclusively to location. Shane lives in California and Lorenz lives in Arizona, though they and a good many other out-of-towners will be moving to Anderson for training camp. As things stand now, the quarterback competition is slated to take place between Shane, Lorenz, and returning quarterback Marcus Littlejohn. All of them performed quite well in their 2018 quote debuts and didn't manage to pull ahead of each other in any broad manner, and due to the former two passers' absence until March, there won't be much of a way to gauge how things will shake out. Should the quarterbacks all continue to perform at optimum levels, the big decision could be based exclusively on which player head coach Kent Meredith feels best complements his offense. As he demonstrated last year, Mark is a particularly mobile quarterback with an innate ability to escape the pocket when need be. He spent the 2017 offseason working on his pocket presence and accuracy though, and while the fruits of that labor have shown profusely, his legs are still a big part of his game. Lorenz Steffen is an archetypal West Coast style passer with a speedy release, quick feet, and one of the strongest arms in the league. Intermediate throws and looking off defenders are among his greatest assets, and while some more prim and proper coaches and fans may be a bit concerned about his height, he's adamant that it isn't anything to worry about.
I think Baker Mayfield's in the same situation right now, and he's probably going to be a first rounder for sure. So I mean, I'm right there where everyone else is. You know what I mean? If you also see some of the taller quarterbacks like Brock Osweiler isn't very mobile, so I think that definitely helps me in the mobility category.
Shane Martinez, a quarterback that was hand-recruited by Coach Meredith from some 2,500 miles away, has a little bit of everything. He may not be able to throw a football 80 yards, but he's fast enough to get himself out of trouble should the need arise. He doesn't have the agility to spin around defensive backs and juke linebackers, but he's got the cerebral mind and accuracy required to throw his receivers into open spots on the field. He also boasts an incredibly humble personality and a personal drive that's as good as anyone's, and much like everyone else that's tried out this past winter, he's got a great supporting cast of family members cheering him on back home. For now though, the quarterback battle remains shrouded in mystery. The second tryout didn't see Marcus attempt many passes. He actually spent most of the day at receiver on account of him wanting to run around some while giving the younger quarterbacks an opportunity to try their hand at the indoor game.
Yeah, it's mostly so they can get reps in and coach could see what he wanted to see out of what was here. But secondly, because I wanted to run. But yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, the Dragons' quarterback battle was originally slated to be between 4 men and not 3, though at some point in late February this changed. Jordan Gray, a student at Bob Jones University, had been invited to training camp following the team's first tryout in November and was present at the team's second public outing to try and earn himself a contract, but wasn't ever signed. Both he and his brother Joseph, an ultra-speedy wide receiver with whom Jordan boasted incredible chemistry, were slated to duke it out in the gauntlet come springtime, but as new talents came in, Coach Meredith made a peculiar move and opted to essentially redshirt the Gray brothers for the 2018 season so that they could become more accustomed with the game. They'll both attend training camp with a pen and clipboard and may see some practice squad duties, but for the time being, their primary goal will be to get a better understanding of the arena game and all its quirks, something the two fast learners likely won't have any problems with. They'll be back come 2019 when they'll look to boast their new skills in position battles that could feature a herd of familiar faces or a slew of new talents. Only time will tell, but until then, there's other matters to take care of. Since mid-April of 2017, Davon He-Man Gardner has had the fullback spot locked up as tight as one could ever hope to. Despite playing in only 2.5 games in the Dragons' inaugural season, he earned himself the SIF Best Running Back Fullback Award and has been locked into the team's roster ever since, and that still remains true. He-Man was among the first players the Dragons signed following their November tryout, though much like all the other positions on the field, his spot was getting a bit crowded. Enter Jesse Turman, a combination fullback and linebacker that, along with Nick Darris, Bishop Wallace, Dexter Ferguson, and Bobby Kennebrew, played with the traveling and rather mysterious Carolina Cowboys in 2017. He and his friends had planned on moving up to play for the Dragons since last season ended, and those dreams have all been realized. Turman, Darris, Wallace, Ferguson, and Kennebrew were all signed, though most of them have decided on their position. Turman, though, is set to be one of maybe just 2 or 3 athletes that, routinely, plays both sides of the ball. Whereas He-Man archetypally fits the role of the dual-threat arena fullback, Turman's skill set more resembles one that'd be found outside. As a runner, he's quick on his feet and not at all hesitant about getting to the perimeter, and as a linebacker, he's got the skills required to efficiently rush the passer or drop into coverage whenever necessary. He'll likely spend a good bit of time on offense, though, where he'll be splitting time with He-Man. Meredith says he has big plans for both players, but so as to keep other teams in the dark, hasn't actually revealed what they are. Kent's a crafty play caller with an affinity for tricks, though, so it's really anyone's guess as to what he's got planned. As far as outdoor football is concerned, it's generally accepted that the quarterback spot is the most important position on the team. Inside, though, things aren't all that clear. Teams with superstar quarterbacks like Chris Wallace do show prowess on the field, but clubs without a true franchise passer have succeeded as well. That being said, though, if a quarterback doesn't have enough in him to single-handedly run his offense, his teammates need to help him out. And while quarterbacks and coaches will say that that's all about having a reliable offensive line, most everyone else will say that the weight falls on the shoulders of the guys catching the passes. The Dragons' receiver competition started out rather shakily in 2017, but eventually got itself sorted out, seeing a group of 4 men split time snagging passes. Wyatt Rogers and Brandon Ford worked on the outside of the field while Cron Bristol and later on Dakota Airwood worked over the middle, but much like they were at the beginning of last year, things aren't quite that simple anymore. Quan Bristol, who caught the first touchdown in franchise history, left the team due to personal reasons in late February, and Dakota, who'd been looking very sharp going across the middle of the field at tryouts, was involved in a car accident in early March and may not be able to play due to a facial cut that could prevent him from properly putting on a helmet. Wyatt Rogers, as mentioned in the last episode, has had his spot on the team locked down for quite a while, as has slot receiver and New York native Jerron Moore. At this point in time, 5 other receivers, slot man Nick Darris, veterans Brandon Ford and Michael Lee Sr., Iron Man receiver and Jack linebacker Cody Haney, and Xavion Smith, head the competition for the outside and sub positions, and each of them all bring a little something different to the table. Whereas Jerron Moore was a slot receiver that best defenders with speed and route running ability, Nick Darris plays a Julian Edelman-style role and serves as a crash test dummy for his quarterback, who, according to Nick, can throw him into traffic without any fears.
I'm a blue-collar receiver. That's it. I mean, that's what I've been labeled as. I don't do anything fancy. I catch the ball across the middle, I'll take a hit, and I'll keep going. people relate me to my style as Edelman because I don't go down. I'll catch that pass, take the hit, drop my shoulder, keep going, get every yard I can. They can have the deep routes. All these receivers can have the deep routes. You put me across the middle, catch that ball, that's it.
It's a tough role to play, sure, but it's one that isn't really being played at this point in time, which is what makes Nick such a unique talent. He was signed by the team following their first trial, but hasn't yet been able to display the full extent of his abilities due to Coach Meredith prohibiting the use of helmets and pads until training camp begins. Brandon Ford's prowess as a receiver stems mainly from his height and jumping ability. He's a former basketball player and a smart one at that, and he spends most of his time going down the sideline and simply out-muscling and out-hopping the smaller DBs made to cover him.
High point in the pass is like, I guess, it's quite similar to like a rebound. So, like I said, that's what helps me. I mean, I've never been the fastest person on the field, never been the strongest person on the field. Just tall, I can jump, I can high point. So, combine that with route running. So, I mean, that's what helps me, really. I mean, DBs are just too small to defend me, really.
Due to logistical problems, Ford initially wasn't set to suit up in the teal and white in 2018, but once the Dragons' front office got player housing locked down, they invited Ford back to the Upstate, and he's been with the team ever since. The other receivers all have their own unique skills as well. Michael Lee Sr. has 5 years of indoor experience under his belt, Cody Haney has the strength needed to move guys around if need be, and Zay Smith can get downfield at the drop of a hat. Whoever gets the starting nods will likely be the ones Meredith feels best complements Wyatt and Jerron's skill sets. There's a great variety of playing styles to pick from, and as of now, any one of them could win out the 3rd and 4th spots. In football as a whole, trends towards speed and agility are beginning to replace the pushes for size and strength we saw in the early 21st century. Teams are all about stopping the spread these days and will do whatever it takes to pull that off, but indoors, the spread, really and truly, isn't all that big an issue in the sense that it's been what defenses has gone up against since day one. Sure, there's a few run-based teams out there like the Austin Wild and Cape Fear Heroes, but for the most part, every team's offensive philosophy is the same. Pass, pass, and pass again. Now that being said, things run a bit differently indoors. Outside, we're seeing a big push for speedy linemen that value technique over strength, but in the arena game, that isn't even close to what's happening. Enter the Dragons' current offensive line prospects. Brandon Bingham, 6'3", 305. Bishop Wallace, 6'1", 300. Dexter Ferguson, 6'3", 365. It's a big group of big boys, and in addition to protecting the quarterback, they'll look to provide some continuity up front as well. The Dragons had a revolving door at offensive line last year, and Bingham was the only true constant. After the Dragons hired a line coach in the back half of 2017, things seemed to get a bit more stable, but were still somewhat shaky up front. Now though, with increased practice time and team chemistry, guys like Dexter Ferguson can really sit down and focus on their craft. Now at the beginning of November, the battle at offensive line was set to be one of epic proportions, but in a rather interesting move, not that many of them actually got signed. Bingham, Ferguson, and Wallace are, at this point in time, the only 3 offensive linemen on the team, though there are some defensive linemen that could sub in should the need arise. Meredith has said not to fret though, as he expects many more big men will come into training camp before the season begins. Until then, the Dragons' current line prospects have an uncanny opportunity to gel and build the chemistry they need to truly function as a group instead of individuals. The Dragons, at the time of this recording, are set to return to the shotgun in 2018, which throws in the extra challenge of having to protect up front for an extra half second or two. And as our next group of guys can tell you, half a second is sometimes all that's needed to turn a game on its head. For one reason or another, the Dragons' defensive line, simply put, isn't nearly as big as their offensive one. It's a unit that, much like the ones we're seeing pop up outdoors, is highly predicated on speed and agility, perhaps so as to run right by some of the huge offensive linemen the indoor game sports. Whether or not that will work remains to be seen, but for now the talent looks promising. There is of course one big man up front, there always is, this time in the form of Quentin Pivot, a 6', 320-pound nose tackle with an ability to wreak havoc on unsuspecting centers and fullbacks. Supplementing him on the edge are Gerard Holbrooks, a 6'4", 250-pound edge rusher, and a few other folks that bounced around between linebacker and DE at tryouts. In fact, most everyone that's played defensive end, be they a permanent resident there or not, has been an edge rusher. And in retrospect, that's not so much a testament to how rare big guys are these days as it is a testament to the evolution of football itself. More and more, we're seeing these tall, limber defensive ends, Joey Bosa, Carlos Dunlap, Jason Pierre-Paul, absolutely torch offensive tackles with their speed and block shedding ability, and that's usually up against double teams. Indoors, linemen always go up against a single offensive tackle, and as we've just seen, those tackles are usually big, burly guys that, while difficult to move out of the way, can be run around should the opportunity present itself. In such a pass-heavy game, the problems raised by edge rushers, and isolated ones at that, can cause chaos if given the chance to do so, and without proper preparation, can completely dismantle an offense's game plan. Likewise, offenses have evolved to stop that from happening, primarily through the use of lightning-quick passing attacks that get the ball out of the quarterback's hands before the defensive line has a chance to react. Some of the teams, like the Florida Tarpons, are a bit more keen on this concept than others, such as the more vertically minded Dragons, but all squadrons utilize it to a degree. Due to linebacker restrictions and the general difficulty involved with setting up a dependable ground game, teams tend to use these short passes as faux runs that chip away at a defense's mindset and stamina rather than drag them up and down the field. But again, why not just cut out the fluff and put an actual ground game together? Cape Fear does it, Austin does it, so why isn't everybody else? Well, there's a few guys that'll tell you all about it. Say what you will about the surplus of quarterbacks and receivers the Dragons have headed into training camp. Despite what the roster may say, it's the linebacker spots that are the most crowded. Both spots, Mac and Jack, have about 3 guys each vying for a job, and unlike the quarterback and receiver competitions, there isn't much but grit and outright gridiron prowess separating the competition. At this point in time, the two frontrunners in the battle are 2017 veteran Antoine Legrune at Mac and converted wide receiver Cody Haney at Jack. Their skill sets translate well to their prospective positions, though both of them, at least by AFL standards, are a bit on the smaller side. In fact, next to none of the Dragons' linebacker prospects fit the archetypal roles set forth by the AFL, though given the competition, this is actually a genius tactical move. All arena football teams are allowed 2 backs in the offensive box, a quarterback and some sort of ball carrier, either a fullback or a traditional outdoor running back. In the AFL, using a fullback is almost non-negotiable due to MAC linebackers, which in that league are essentially just glorified defensive tackles with some speed on them, blitzing on almost every play. Because the quarterback's busy dropping back to pass, it's the back's responsibility to block the MAC when he comes, and because the MAC is usually an absolute monster of a human being, the back blocking him has to be as well. In fact, some AFL teams don't even have fullbacks. They just throw an extra offensive lineman back there and tell him to stay on his toes. In the AAL, though, there aren't a lot of those huge MAC linebackers because non-AFL teams have strayed away from the use of fullbacks over the past few years. To combat this, MAC linebackers have gotten smaller and faster, just like the backs they're facing. It's that simple. Now, despite the prowess Legrune and Haney have shown, their spots are far from secure. As I mentioned earlier, the Dragons' linebacker core is filled to the brim with talent, and most of it's pretty similar in its makeup. Bobby Kennebrew, a prospective third down back turned linebacker, comes in at 6 foot 230 and has demonstrated some solid coverage and tackling skills, and Jesse Turman, who's set to sub in at the fullback spot when need be, will likely see some time at the MAC as well. While the starters will be set in stone at some point, for all the prospects there really isn't that much to worry about. Meredith is a coach that is very adamant about making sure his players don't get worn out, and in the past he's had no problem subbing folks in and out for the sake of preserving energy. Should any prospective linebackers make it to training camp, they'll likely see some time on the field, but how much time depends on the evaluations of Meredith, Galloway, and their fellow coaches. Because of stuff like this, and this, indoor defensive backs oftentimes get quite a bad rap. Critics say that they simply can't cover guys and are too quick to bite on double moves, and while that may be true in a few isolated incidents every year, for the most part the lack of prowess shown by DBs is just a reflection of the game they play, a game that's designed to be almost impossible for them to thrive in. In the outdoor game, a one-on-one matchup between a receiver and a defensive back is a coveted opportunity that, because of its highly exploitable nature, isn't often utilized by defensive coordinators. Indoors, though, because linebackers can't really do anything to help out coverage-wise, DBs have to go one-on-one. There's not any other choice. In that sense, they are, at all times, just one quick step from getting absolutely torched, and despite the prowess they showed last year, veteran Dragon defensive backs from 2017 would be the first to admit that.
I really don't know what to tell you because everyone has their own thing. Everybody does their own thing when it comes to playing different receivers. My best advice for that would be just play through the receiver. He's a big body guy, so I'm going to play through him. I look forward to that matchup.
It's a rough life that these indoor DBs live, and while it's always hard, the difficulty comes in different ways for different people. In the arena game, there are essentially 3 different DB spots: the boundary corner, the field corner, and the safety. The boundary corner is almost always going to be matched up on the outside-most receiver, who in all likelihood will be somewhere around 6'4". To combat this, boundary corners adopt a Richard Sherman-like playstyle in terms of both physicality and outright size itself. 2017 boundary corner Anthony Quillis was 6'0", 195, and while he was by no means the biggest guy on the field, he was among the most tough and resilient, which worked well against the tall receivers he faced. In the indoor game, the way to beat specific receiver archetypes is to fight fire with fire, which is why field corners are small, slender guys that can change direction on a dime. They, on most occasions, line up in the slot and guard shifty receivers in the vein of Nick Garris and Jerron Moore, oftentimes having to play a bit soft and allow quick grabs underneath so as to stop long runs after the catch. Jabari Bryant Sr. played field corner last year and performed pretty well, but is currently in talks with defensive coordinator Anthony Galloway and DB's coach Nicholas Weidman about, on account of his experience and leadership skills, a potential move to safety, a more balanced position that almost exclusively matches up against motion receivers. Those receivers can either be big-framed jumpers or shifty route runners or a Wyatt Rogers-style combination of both, and safeties need to be prepared to face off with any of them, which, combined with the added challenge of defending receivers with a full head of steam, is what makes the position almost impossible to play. The now retired Dante Johnson was one of the best safeties the arena game has ever seen, but even he had his struggles. It's just not a position that takes kindly to mistakes, and so much as a misplaced toe is enough to cause complete disaster. As of now, Jabari is still in the process of adapting to the position, and only time will tell if he'll maintain his spot there or move back to field corner. Other DB prospects include 2017 veteran Lance Jackson, fellow field corner Greg Speedy Covington, rookies Daniel Walker and Marcus Brown, and many, many others. Lance is the likely candidate to take up the now open boundary corner position, and should Jabari stay at safety, Speedy would be the most sensible candidate at field corner. That scenario would lock everything up aside from a few sub-positions, but should Bryant move back to field corner, chaos might ensue as other DBs try to adapt to the safety spot in hopes of winning it. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out in training camp, but for now, things remain a mystery. Now, needless to say, training camp's set to be hard-fought and chaotic on all fronts. Some positions as of now are more stable than others, some are partially locked down and partially empty, and some are all but wide open. But if there's a single spot that's truly, without a shadow of a doubt, set in stone, it's the one held by this man, Austin Peay, the Dragons' 41-year-old kicker. A good many players on the roster are, at this point, single. Some have girlfriends, some have married, and some even have a few young ones of their own. Austin, though, has 4, one of which he'll be sending off to college in a few short years. To put that age gap into perspective, prospective defensive lineman Ashton Gibson at 19 isn't even half Austin's age. But Austin and Ken will be the first folks to say that, at least in the kicking game, that doesn't really matter. Austin was at the team's first tryout in November and, upon his not scoring a contract, spent the next 2 months absolutely working his tail off to get his leg strength to optimum levels and solidify his place on the team. At a meeting in January, that hard work and dedication paid off, and Austin was signed to the team with his family right in sight. Quite a triumph for a man that hadn't played football in a while, and that story of determination and grit, combined with Austin's infectious personality, has made him into quite a familiar face among the other players.
I'm trying to earn the respect of some of these younger guys. I know they see me, and several of them are hollering at me, coach, which motivates me a little bit more. I've been a coach for almost 15 years. Hearing these younger guys, when I'm out there doing something with them, say coach, to me as a player, that's good motivation.
As impressive as his journey's been thus far, though, what might be the most difficult part was one that most everyone else would overlook completely. Per order of Coach Meredith, Austin was told to focus almost exclusively on low-altitude distance and accuracy as opposed to the grand soaring kicks exhibited in the AFL. Such an order came not on the cusp of reservations regarding Austin's ability or concerns about returns, but rather a quirk of the Anderson Sports and Entertainment Center, the Dragons' home for the 2018 season. The arena sports the lowest ceiling in the AAL, and per league rule, should the ball hit the ceiling or any structure attached to it on a kickoff, the ball will be placed at the 20-yard line of the receiving team. The Dragons actually saw this rule come into play last year against the Florida Tarpons, who sent a ball sailing into their own scoreboard.
Oh my! It was a waterboard for him.
Well, that's going to go out to the 20. After bearing witness to such a peculiar phenomenon, Meredith was determined not to let history repeat itself and instructed Austin to angle things a bit closer to the ground, potentially risking longer returns but decreasing the chances of him hitting anything he shouldn't. Low altitude kicks also tend to get a considerable amount of distance on them, which plays perfectly into the new Uno rule, which states that any kickoff that goes to the opposing team's uprights is worth a single point, upping the maximum scoring output of a single possession from 8 to 9.
A lot of motivation, takes some pressure on the kicker. Now we can contribute in other ways other than after a team scores. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to putting points on the board independently and driving it right through, getting that Uno.
Of course, Unos won't be the only thing to look forward to in 2018. These position battles that the prospective Dragons have gotten themselves into is a telltale sign of a team ripe with talent, and once everything's said and done, coaches and fans can rest assured that nature will have made sure only the best of the best will remain and suit up on Saturdays. Some of the players are closer to that goal than others, and some still have yet to even begin working toward it. But one thing remains factual. In 2018, the Dragons will strive for nothing less than a championship run, and given the talent they've got heading into training camp, that really doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. After all, the guys all around the AAL are already calling the Dragons a sleeper team and a potential playoff contender, so why not try and make those predictions come true?
Should have had my beauty personnel with me today.
That right there, that line right there is going to go right at the very end of this thing after the credits.
Oh,
just going to be
you're
you
recording?
saying